In the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1, we have these words. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. Notice this. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, which he, Nebuchadnezzar, carried into the land of Shinar, or Babylon, to the house of his God. Notice it, to the house of Nebuchadnezzar's God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Babylon was located in what is present day Iraq. And that's where I get this title, King of Iraq, or King of Babylon, converted to God of Israel. So if you want to stick with me and find out more of the details, let's dig into it. Almighty God, Yahweh, Jehovah, is still supreme, even when his people sin. See, Nebuchadnezzar thought his God was greater than the God of Israel, who is the supreme God, the ruler over all things, the creator of heaven and earth. He thought his God, Marduk, the God of Babylon, was greater than the God of Israel. And when the Almighty allowed him to conquer Israel and carry away the vessels of the temple, and he allowed him to do that, and Nebuchadnezzar took them and put them in the house of his God, Marduk. Now you can see why he thought that he was so mighty and powerful over Israel and Israel's God. And he became a very, very proud man. He was very powerful, very mighty, and it went to his head. He was filled with pride. So let's go to Daniel chapter 2, and we'll dig into this story of how Israel's conqueror, Nebuchadnezzar, was humbled before the God of Israel. In chapter 2, I don't have time to read the whole thing, so I'm going to give you an overview. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and it's a very, very important dream, and he knew when he woke up it was very important, and he wanted to know what the meaning was of the dream was, but he couldn't even remember the dream. And he had the wise men of Babylon come in and said, "You're going to interpret this dream for me." And they said, "Well, what's the dream?" He said, "I forgot." And they said, no king asked the people like us to interpret a dream that they don't even know what the dream is. He says, "But if you don't, then I'll know that you're just making up the interpretation. And by the way, if you don't tell me the dream and the interpretation, I'm going to kill all of you." Read it in chapter 2. So we'll start in verse 47 at the end of chapter 2. It says this, the king answered unto Daniel. This is after Almighty God, Yahweh, Jehovah, revealed to Daniel what the dream was and the interpretation. And Daniel tells him what it is. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, "Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of lords." Babylon they had more than one god. Their chief god was Marduk, but they had numerous gods. And so I think the Almighty's starting to give him an idea of who Almighty God, the supreme God, is. And he admits, he says, "Your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing that you could reveal this secret." Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And 49 is interesting too. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. The king starts getting an idea that the God of Daniel, the God of Israel, is unusual, and yet he has the vessels of the temple of Almighty God in the temple of his God, Marduk. Now let's go to chapter 3. And I'll give you an overview of this too, because I'll have time to read 4 chapters here. So these, the king makes a 90-foot high idol, a golden idol, and he demands of everyone that they bow down. When all kinds of music's played, it's a signal for everyone to bow down to this idol. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, they wouldn't bow down. Their God is Yahweh Jehovah, and they wouldn't bow down. It's forbidden them to worship any other God. There's only one God, they say, and we're not bowing down. And the king pressed them and gave them an opportunity an extra opportunity to bow down. And they said, we're not careful to answer you about this. Our God is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace that you're going to throw us in. But even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down to your idol. They were so bold, the king Nebuchadnezzar was furious. And he threw them into the fiery furnace after it had been heated 7 times hotter than usual. And the fire could not burn them up. It was a miracle from Almighty God. It's not a myth, it's a fact of life, of history. And the king was amazed. And not only did they survive the fire, when he looked down in there, he saw 4 men. The 4th one was like the Son of God, the Son of Man. And he had them bring them out. And then we pick up the end of the story in verse 28. And it says this: Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You see, this is their God. Notice I said their God. Marduk is Nebuchadnezzar's God, even after what happened with Daniel being able to interpret the dream. And he's like, wow, this is impressive. Your God's impressive. But notice that their God. He says, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any God except notice that, their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language that speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, or a septic tank, a pile of poop, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. I've written here, after this first event where we just read in chapter 2, the king didn't get it. he said some right things, but he didn't get it. And then after this second event, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they can't be burned up. And I write here, Nebuchadnezzar starts to get it, but he still doesn't completely get it. Imagine this, a second time the Almighty has revealed himself to Nebuchadnezzar, and he's flabbergasted by the whole thing and does honor, but it's their God, not his God. Now let's go to chapter 4, and I'll give you an overview of this one. This time he has a second dream, and he remembers the dream, but he's very concerned about the interpretation. Daniel comes before him and gives him the interpretation. And Daniel's always careful to give Almighty God, Yahweh, Jehovah, the glory and praise. He's like, I'm not able to interpret these things, but there's a God in heaven who knows everything. And he'll give the king an answer of peace on this. And Almighty God revealed the dream to humble Daniel. And the king again is very amazed. And so we'll pick up in verse 28. In this whole chapter, it's a very interesting chapter. Nebuchadnezzar is basically narrating the story. If you notice in verse 1 and 2, and right in there, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all people, nations, language that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. This supreme God, the high God, means the supreme, the one over all. He did this to me. Think about that. It's becoming more personal with him. It's not just one of the gods and wow, he's great. This God visited me and did this to me. It says in verse 3, how great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Now back to verse 28, and we have about 9 or 10 verses here. All this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, this is after this dream that Daniel interpreted. It was about King Nebuchadnezzar, and it was a warning from Almighty God to humble himself. He says at the end of 12 months after this dream, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. Notice this, the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom of the might of my power, for the honor of my majesty? You see the pride there? I'm pretty sure that Nebuchadnezzar wasn't the first king of Babylon. But he thinks he's done all of this and he's mighty and great. And by the way, after making this big island, it might have even been of he himself, I don't know. But he thought he was something. And he's admitting it, verse 31, while the word was in the king's mouth, talking about how great he himself was, while the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, I mean, there's different stories like that. You remember on the road to Damascus, how there was a voice from heaven, and Jesus Christ himself, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul's astonished. He doesn't believe in Jesus Christ. He knew he was a man, a person, but he didn't believe he was the Son of God. And Almighty God, his son Jesus Christ, stopped him cold on the road to Damascus and all. And you can read that story for yourself. But a voice from heaven, if you will, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from you. Now imagine that after he just got through saying it. Notice it says, while the word was in the king's mouth. He hadn't even closed his mouth when he said that. And there's this voice from heaven, Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're big stuff? The kingdom's departed from you. Now, how shocking would that be? That's very personal. It's not a story over here and over there. It's coming to pass right on him. And the voice goes on and says, "And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you to eat grass as an oxen, and 7 times or 7 years shall, or seasons, years, shall pass over you until you know that the Most High, the Supreme, the one over all, ruleth in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he will." The voice from heaven repeated basically the words of the dream that he had had and Daniel had interpreted to him 12 months before. Imagine that. He knew that this was a big deal. It is virtually exactly like the other words. Verse 33, the same hour, get that. While he was still speaking, the voice came, and the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. That's scary. And you go up against Almighty God again and again and again, and bad stuff can happen. Thankfully, it wasn't his death. He lived. but he had to go through a thing. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven. He was outdoors till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers. He started looking like a wild beast, and his nails like bird's claws. He lived outdoors under the dew, and day by day and night by night, and was the appearance of an animal to a degree. And if you read in the whole chapter there, it says he was given the heart of a beast. And if you read it carefully, you understand he was a very intelligent, bright, smart man. And his reason changed, his sharpness and brightness changed, and he became like a beast and thought a lot like a beast, but apparently was still a little bit aware, I think. Verse 34 says, at the end of the days, when 7 times had passed over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven. You imagine that? After being apparently 7 years, 7 seasons at least, out in the wild, like a wild animal, and being a lot like a wild animal, he looks up to heaven. And notice what it says. And my understanding returned unto me. The Almighty took away that beast heart and returned his bright heart. My understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High. I guess so. But think about it. He had conquered Israel, carried away the vessels, some of the vessels out of the temple, who was the vessels of Almighty God, the supreme God that's dealing with him here, and put them in the house of his God, and then had 2 events before this that should have convinced him, and he still didn't listen. Whoever out there has an ear to hear, let them hear. Whoever out there has resisted the Almighty over and over, may you have ears to hear. Don't resist the God of heaven. There are a lot of people say, well, so-and-so happened, so I just don't believe in God. That's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar. He believed in himself. Even after the Almighty had spoken to him twice before, and then this 3rd time, And he's just carrying on his way. This mighty Babylon, I'm something. And if I put it in my own words, I'm a virtual God. He looked up to heaven, and his reason, his brightness returned to him. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever. Who lives forever? Almighty God, whose dominion is an everlasting or a forever dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he does according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say unto him, what are you doing? How many people, they question Almighty God. They'll say stuff like, well, how could a God of love do so and so? Or how could God, this Christian God, be this way? Well, Nebuchadnezzar realized he was, like Paul said, I'm the chiefest of sinners. Nebuchadnezzar realized, well, you know, how proud and pompous I've been, but Almighty God, if I put it in my own words, the high God, the supreme God, humbled me, and I looked up to heaven and I honored him and I blessed him. I praised him. He basically said, I admit, I'm not going to say to Almighty God, what are you doing? No, you're Almighty God. You do whatever you choose to do. You've just done it to me. Who could ever tell a story like me? I ran among the beasts of the field and ate grass and was confused and couldn't think like I had before. And after 7 times passed over, I realized, and I admit openly and notoriously on the record, that Almighty God is God. There's none like him. No one can ask, what are you doing? He does whatever he wants. Verse 36, at the same time my reason returned unto me, the sharpness of his mind, the beast mind gone, the beast heart's gone, and the mind that he had before returned. And for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and brightness returned unto me. And my counselors and my lords sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom. And excellent majesty was added unto me. I like his humility. It took a lot for him to get there, but he got there. I give glory and praise to Almighty God, the supreme God. Verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment and justice. Notice this last part. And those that walk in pride, that was him. Is there anyone out there walking in pride? Your story's not as big as this, I'm sure. He says, and those that walk in pride, he is able to abase or humble. So here's this foreign king or emperor, if you will, that is pretty stubborn, but his heart isn't completely closed off. And I like that about him. The Almighty knows the heart of men. He knows who is willing to open up their heart, and he knows who will stubbornly refuse to ever acknowledge who he is. He knows. And he gave this foreign pompous king good going over, and he responded and acknowledged who Almighty God is. I suspect that Nebuchadnezzar is in heaven. Almighty God knows I don't know those things. But these stories are not in the Bible for nothing. And so again, my title, King of Iraq, King of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar converted to the God of Israel. Almighty God bless you. Have a good week.